Later this week, we will get another report on the pace of inflation in the U.S., and there's some hope that it is finally slowing. But you've probably noticed higher prices at the grocery store already on everything from dairy to meat to wheat products. The cost of groceries rose 13.5% in the past year. That's the largest increase in 43 years. Our economics correspondent, Paul Solman, looks at what's driving those costs up.
At the Daily Market in Boston's Dorchester neighborhood, I asked agricultural economist David Ortega about food prices. Have you ever seen anything like this?
Not in my lifetime, no.
So what are the major factors?
First, we have the supply chain disruptions from COVID that are still lingering. Those led to rising energy prices, rising transportation costs, rising labor costs. On average, 16 cents out of every dollar spent on food can be tied back to the farm. Everything else, the vast majority, has to do with things like processing cost, transportation, the wholesale, and the retail trade. And we've seen all of those prices go up.
Meanwhile, another cost driver, climate change.
If we look at the heat and drought that's taking place out west in California, that's where a lot of our produce is coming from.
Right.
And a lot of those crops are lower in yield because of heat stress, some failed crops. And that's less food available in the market, which puts upward pressure on prices.
And then, of course, there's the war in Ukraine.
That region is what's called the breadbasket of Europe, a major supplier of wheat and sunflower oil, which goes into a lot of processed food products. So that set off rising commodity prices on the global market. They have started to come down from their highs back in April and May. But it takes time for all of that to work its way down the supply chain to consumers.
Finally, there's the fowl factor.
The bird flu outbreak this year, it's the second largest outbreak we've seen in modern history. It's affected over 40 million birds, many in commercial operations, and that sent the price of poultry and eggs surging.
As is evident on store shelves.
Eggs are up 40% year over year. The fear is that we're going to see further outbreaks as we get into the cooler months.
The price may go up even further.
It can. It all depends on what happens.
And if you plan to beat inflation by breakfasting on cereal instead of eggs, think again.
When we look at wheat and processed wheat products, they're up just above 20% year over year. Life cereal?
Life, yes.
Life. So that's $5.49 for this box here.
Yep.
Small box.
Yep.
A lot of that has to do with the rising grain prices from the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
The cost of butter up close to 30%.
Energy costs, transportation costs that are needed to make butter are all high.
When it comes to climbing coffee costs, climate change is the culprit, says Ortega.
Coffee in general, we're looking at about almost 20% more expensive than last year. A lot of this is tied to adverse weather around the globe, especially in coffee producing regions like Brazil that saw frost and drought last year, and that's put upward pressure on prices.
It's a shock every time I want to get groceries.
The consumer reaction, sticker shock.
I mean, I'm a young professional here. I'm just earning a salary, so it's pretty hard to get by like this.
I pity people with families. I don't know how. My wife was from a family of 14. I don't know how people are feeding 4 or 5.
I mean, it sucks. I mean, I got that.
I feel for the customers, but it's just not abating.
James Baker owns the Daily Market.
We have a load that came in today. We have 13 pages of price changes we have to make, right here. So we'll have price tags we have to put on the shelf to change the prices and increase them.
This is Nishki rice, brown, so brown rice. Previous price $5.39, retail price $7.49.
Yes.
And
this is from week to week.
No.
Yes, we get this once a week.
I'm looking down here. There isn't an item that hasn't gone up in price.
There's a few, not many.
Oh, yes. Dalmatia spread fig went from $6.79 to $6.29.
Look at that. We have a winner.
Like many consumers, small businessman Baker believes corporate opportunism is also helping drive up prices.
Certain parts of the food industry that have been consolidated, and where there was more competition previously, there's not as much competition. You talk about the major pork providers, they've all been consolidated so that the company can drive their profit margin up and maintain the higher price.
Are customers moving from more expensive to less expensive substitutes?
Some of that's happening. We carry a lot of higher end chicken product, and we've now brought in a good quality chicken product, but much more affordable. And you're seeing that's moving off the shelf quite a bit.
But economist Alberto Cavallo, whose Billion Prices project tracks prices daily online, says more demand for cheaper products is driving up their prices much faster.
We actually found that the cheaper varieties at the beginning of the pandemic have experienced nearly twice as much inflation as the most expensive varieties. And why is that happening? Well, as people are substituting into cheaper goods, they're increasing the relative demand, and that pushes prices up in this context of a very limited supply overall.
No wonder higher prices are busting American budgets, devastating paycheck-to-paycheck households who spend a higher percentage of their budgets on food. But David Ortega notes that food inflation is creating catastrophe elsewhere in the world.
Places in North Africa, the Middle East, their food prices surging 20, 30, in some cases even above 50%. So those countries in worse shape than what we have here in the US. We also look at regions in the Horn of Africa that are on the verge of famine, and that's a very critical situation.
Okay, the final big question. When, if ever, will food inflation slow down?
We hope that prices start to moderate, or at least the rate of increase starts to moderate. But because the rate of increase starts moderating doesn't mean that prices are going to come down, and that's important to keep in mind. When we talk about inflation, we're talking about the rate of increase in prices. And so when that starts to come down, it just means that prices are rising, but just not as quickly.
I think most of us would say we'll take what we can get. For the PBS NewsHour, Paul Salman in Boston.